Okay, it's workshop time. I'm about to get stuck into prepping the DesertX Rally for our upcoming Burke Wills Expedition. It's on in just under 2 weeks' time, so I've got a bunch of work to do this weekend getting the bike set up and ready to handle the desert conditions. And I thought it was a good idea to run you through a few of the things that I normally do before a big expedition length ride like this one, to prepare the bike to survive the outback conditions as best we can. So I've got a few bits and pieces I'm going to fit up to the bike. The number one thing, I generally start off at the bottom of the bike with the tyres and the tubes. I'm always changing tyres, and for a big ride like this, the number one thing to get right is the tyres, to avoid getting punctures, but also to be able to go the distance. We're doing about 4,000 kilometres all up on the Burke Wills Expedition, and about the only tyres I trust to do that sort of distance are the Motoz tyres. I've been using them for, well, pretty much 10 years now. The tyre that I'm actually going to fit on the back of the DesertX for this ride is the Adventure. Normally I'd run a Rails or the Euro Enduro 6, which is much more aggressive off-road sort of style tyre. But for the Burke Wills trip, we're doing a lot more, well, a higher percentage of bitumen sealed roads than we would normally do. But also we've got a lot of high-speed sort of gravel roads, a lot of straight line running. So I'm looking for a tyre that's going to be a little bit quieter running on those sorts of roads, but also longer lasting. So the knobs on the Adventure tyre are a little bit closer together, which will keep it a bit smoother running on the bitumen sealed sections, but also last longer. So that'll be going on the back of the bike. On the front, I'm going to be running the Dual Venture, or the DV. So these are a relatively new tyre from Motoz. It's probably been about 18 months now, but I think a lot of people are still getting onto them. They're my go-to tyre now on the adventure bikes. I absolutely love the DV. One of the big advantages with this tyre is that you can reverse it. So halfway through the life of the tyre, you can swap it around on the rim, because with the big heavy adventure bikes with powerful brakes, in high-speed riding conditions, if you're hard on the brakes, on the front brake in particular, you will naturally end up with a lot of scalloping, or the shape of the front knobs will wear in a bit of an unusual way. That's natural with every type of tyre when you're pushing them hard. So with the DV, I can flip that tyre around on the rim halfway through its life and really extend its life. This tyre does come in both tube type and tubeless. The DesertX Rally is tube type rims, or I've got tubes fitted to the rim on this bike. So the knob pattern between the tube and the tubeless type tyres is ever so slightly different. The tube type is a little bit more aggressive. The knobs are a little bit smaller, so it's slightly more aggressive for off-road riding, which suits me in the style of riding I do. But I found this tyre works really well in the broadest range of conditions. It's very hard for a tyre to do everything, but in all the tyres in the Motoz range and pretty much any other tyre that I've used, I found this one the most universal for a front tyre. Works really, really well. So they'll be getting fitted on. And while I'm fitting those tyres, I'm going to be swapping the tubes that are in the rims as standard on the DesertX. So again, with these rough outback conditions that we're going into, we're heading from Melbourne, retracing the Burke Wills Expedition route from Melbourne through Menindee, Broken Hill, Tibooburra, Birdsville, and right up to the Gulf of Carpentaria to Corumba. And the roads that we're going on, a lot of the times we're going to be travelling at high speed, sort of north of 90 kilometres per hour, and they're typically quite rocky. And also we can have those bitumen sections I was talking about, where heat build-up can be an issue, but also just pounding into rocks and sharp-edged hits. So I'm fitting ultra heavy-duty tubes, or uber heavy-duty tubes from Motoz. There is a massive difference between these tubes. So I've got 3 different types of tubes here that we can get. So these are the uber heavy duty tubes that I mentioned. These are all 21-inch tyres, or sorry, 21-inch tubes that I've got here. But the uber heavy duty tubes from Motoz are almost like tyres. They're 4mm thick natural rubber, and that's what I'm going to put in the front end of this bike. You can obviously also get heavy duty tubes, and that one that just dropped down on the ground is a standard duty sort of tube that would come, perhaps standard in a bike like this. And you can see even just between those two tubes, there's a massive size difference. So what I'll tend to do is fit the uber heavy duty tubes into the bike and then carry either a heavy duty or the standard duty tube as my backup spare tube because they're considerably lighter and more compact to carry as a spare tube. But I feel confident having those uber heavy duty tubes in the bike that I shouldn't have any punctures on the ride with fresh tyres and good tubes in there. Tyre pressure wise, it's always a question people ask. Normally for the typical sort of riding I do on the DesertX, I'd run 26 PSI front and rear. For this ride, I'm probably going to increase that a little bit, maybe up to around 30 PSI. For bigger bikes like, say, the Multistrada V4, I'd probably run that at 32 PSI. And if I was on a single cylinder bike like a Husqvarna 701, I'd probably run that somewhere in the low 20s, so somewhere between 20 and 24 PSI for that sort of riding. But the DesertX, yeah, I'll probably run somewhere between 26 and 30 PSI, more like that 30 PSI for the, because I don't want to be dealing with punctures out there, basically. So, tyres, that's the number one thing I'll look after on the bike. While I'm down there doing the tyres or servicing, changing those wheels, I'll also check other things like the wheel bearings. I'll give the wheel a wobble in the rim and, in the swing arm and the front forks and see if I can detect any movement in those wheel bearings. If you feel any sort of movement in the wheel, then you know your bearings are on the way out. Maybe give the wheel a spin, or when you remove the wheel out of the bike, stick your finger inside the bearing and just give it a rotate. And if you feel any roughness or notchiness when you're rotating that inner bearing, then it's time for those bearings to be replaced. And far better to do in the workshop a couple of weeks before the ride than trying to do it on the side of the track. The other thing I do is check the brake pads. Make sure the brake pads have still got plenty of life in them, particularly if you're going into muddy conditions, which we could get out there. I know the DesertX, the rear brake pads are quite soft on the DesertX and you can chew them out fairly quickly in muddy conditions. So I'll be packing a spare set of brake pads for the back of my bike in the toolkit. I'll be carrying that Endurostan rear tail bag on the back of the bike, sitting on that little Nomad ADV rack, and that's where I'll have the bulk of my tools, or pretty much all of my tools in there, and maybe the spare tubes. I might strap them on or zip tie them onto the crash bars on the side of the bike. But yeah, so we'll check through the brakes and the wheel bearings while we're down there. Also at the front of the bike, I'll make sure the fork seals don't have any sort of oil leaking around the fork seals. Again, in muddy conditions, we certainly saw it a lot in the last couple of years when we had a lot of La Nina effect going on with really muddy conditions. Just a little bit of dirt or mud can get caught in underneath that fork seal and it'll start to weep or leak oil. And a simple clean by getting a seal doctor or a little bit of plastic or something in underneath that fork seal and getting in and around the seal there can clean that mud and dirt out before it becomes a bigger problem. Coming up in the bike, obviously we're going to check all the fluid levels, the coolant, the engine oil. If you know, for example, on this ride, I'm going to be doing 5,000 kilometres. So have a look at your service schedule. This bike's only done about 3,500 K, so I'm good to do the next 5,000 kilometres without worrying about an oil change. But I will change the oil when I come back from that ride. But check your fluid levels. Clutch and brake master cylinders as well, maybe give them a flush or certainly check the fluid levels at the very least. The next most important thing on an outback ride like this one is the air filter. On the DesertX, the air filter's underneath the fuel tank here, which is good in that the air filter's up nice and high and it's pulling in clean air from the front of the bike. So realistically, I can go a couple of thousand kilometres between cleaning the air filter. It does make it a bit harder to get to, being under the fuel tank, which is a pain. But I'm planning to do a filter service when we get to Birdsville on day 6. We've got a rest day there at Birdsville, so that'll be a few thousand kilometres into the ride, or about 2,500 kilometres in. And for me, that's perfect time to check the air filter, and I'll be carrying a spare air filter element with me. So I've already fitted a Unifilter foam air filter element to the bike. Standard, they come with a paper element like that. And those paper air filter elements are fine if you're riding around on the road or, light sort of dusty conditions. But for proper off-road, you really want to replace that standard paper element that a lot of bikes come fitted with a foam air filter element. So as I said, these are Unifilter brand, an Australian company. and there's actually a 3-piece element with the unifilters, which is typical on most bikes. So with the DesertX, we'll have the green as the inner layer, the yellow is the top layer, and you might be able to see it's got a little bit of a waffle pattern to it just to help to trap more dirt. And then there's the pre-filter element that sits on top of that. So 3 layers of protection, and I feel really confident that I could easily do the 5,000 kilometres. As long as I stay out of the other riders' dust pretty well, I'd have no issues with doing 5,000 kilometres in outback conditions. But as a safety precaution, I'm going to take these pre-oiled filters with me. When I get to Birdsville, tank comes off, new pre-oiled filters go in, and I'll put the dirty filters back in this Ziploc bag and continue on the ride. So that'll look after the air intake on the bike, make sure I've got good clean air coming in there the whole time. I guess a few other things from there starts to come down to personal preferences. I've fitted foam hand grips to my DesertX because with these longer days in the saddle, we're going to be doing 6-8 hour days, maybe, 4 or 5, 600 kilometres. So I like those foam grips. They just take some of that vibration out and reduce calluses and blisters on the hands. That's a personal thing. I've also got heated hand grips in underneath there, or heated elements in underneath, because it is going to be cold. We're in winter in Australia at the moment. It's mid-August when we're doing the ride, and we're going to be starting most mornings, certainly in the single digits. I'd say probably around 5 degrees, might warm up to about 15 degrees during, this is Celsius I'm talking, during the middle of the day for the first, say, 5 days. And it's probably only once we get to the Queensland border that things will start to warm up, and will be from probably the mid-teens to the mid-20s. And, that's when it'll start to become t-shirt weather, and maybe when we get right up towards Corumba, we might be looking to strip off some layers with our riding gear. So really protecting ourselves from the cold is going to be one of the main elements, and that comes back to part of that bike setup, as I said, with heated grips fitted. I'll have my DMD tablet mounted up there for navigation. The other electrical component I'm actually going to fit for this ride is a set of driving lights. I got these lights from Steady. There's a pair of them. One of them is a floodlight, one of them is a spotlight, and they're going to mount down on the crash bars, and I'll wire that back to the battery and have a switch on up near the handlebars. So these Steady lights will go on. Reason being, at this time of the year, there's less daylight and we are covering a lot of kilometres. So sunrise is until about 7:30 in the morning at the moment, where we're going to be in outback New South Wales and Queensland, and sunset is at 6 p.m. So about 11 hours of daylight. And I know I've been caught out there in the past. I try and avoid riding in the dark in Australia, but it just happens sometimes. And I know having all the light you can get out there can never be enough. So fitting a set of driving lights to help keep me safe if I've got to be out there late at night, maybe helping other riders get through. That's one of the things with riding at the outback. You run out of choices. It can be 400 kilometres between towns out there once we get into outback New South Wales and Queensland. So you need to be resourceful, and you also need to be somewhat independent and self-reliant. So the tools that I'll pack with me, the way I prep the bike is designed to get me through the day, and to that extent help other riders get through the day as well. One of the other things that will be important on this outback trip is fuel range. So with the 21 litre fuel tank on the DesertX, I could pretty comfortably do 400 kilometres, and we do have a couple of days there where we're pushing that 400 kilometre fuel range, and I want to have a bit more of a safety buffer on board. So I'm actually going to fit the Ducati accessory auxiliary fuel tank to the bike, which gives me another 8 litres of fuel capacity. Now I know from experience with the Unthinkable ride, we did 450 kilometres, I think it ended up being, from Alice Springs down to Finke and return again without refuelling on this bike. So another 8 litres of fuel capacity on the back of the bike, along with the 21 litres at the front. I know I can comfortably do 450 kilometres pushing it hard over the Finke whoops. So riding in the outback a bit more gently, should be able to do 550, 600 kilometres of fuel range with those 2 tanks on board. So that'll give me a lot more peace of mind, and also gives me that bit of a fuel buffer that I can loan some fuel to other riders if they happen to run out at some stage during the ride. So yeah, fuel range is super important, along with the tyres for this sort of outback trip coming up. That's probably about all. You can see the bike's already clean. I gave it a wash already, and the time when you're washing the bike is a really good time to check over the bike and make sure there's no loose nuts and bolts, or kind of address anything that needs to be looked after on the bike. Whenever I'm riding, I always keep notes on my phone about niggly little things that might happen when I'm riding, and basically add them to a to-do list that I'll address when I get back to the workshop. So things like if your mirrors come loose, or maybe you want to adjust the height of your brake lever or gear lever, I'll make note of that. And then next time I'm in the workshop, I'll address those things. So I'll work through my to-do list on the bike and make sure I've got everything up to scratch and the bike's good to go for the 4,000 kilometre trip. I mentioned I've got the EnduraStand tail bag on the back of the bike, which is going to carry most of my tools in there. I will have a few other bits and pieces in my backpack, like first aid kit and things like that, and that's a whole nother video in itself, so we'll cover that some other time. But that EnduraStand bag is waterproof, and I know I can fit the main tools that I need to carry with me on the bike to cover both my bike and customers' bikes as well. That's about all I can think of in prepping the DesertX for this trip. If you guys have got any questions about how you might prep a bike, there's a lot of individual things depending on the brand and the model of bike that you ride, but some of those points that I covered, tyres, air filter, fluid levels, checking things are tight, or your nuts and bolts are tight, they're the main things that I'll look at before going into a big trip like this. And the other points of wheel bearings, brake pads, any of those moving parts on the bike, address them in the workshop before you get out there into the outback and they become a bigger problem. So that's it. We'll keep updating more videos in the lead up to Burke Wills, and also while we're on the ride, we'll show you more of the stunning Australian outback when we're out there in the middle of Australia.